Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Adi Klevit here, the host of the System Simplified podcast, where I interview top founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And today's episode is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group, where we create, document, and implement processes and procedures so businesses can grow and thrive. And today's guest is Dave Valentine. Hi, Dave.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, you are very welcome. I'm excited. I'm so excited to have you. You know, before I give the proper introduction, I have to first of all thank Jeremy Wise from Rise 25 for connecting us. So go, Jeremy. Absolutely. I love working with Jeremy. Jeremy and John are actually produce my podcast, and I've been working with them for over 2.5 years, creating 6 episodes every month. Yeah, they're amazing. So, and I know he interviewed you, so we're going to include that interview as well, because it was an amazing interview and inspired me to reach out and tell Jeremy, hey, I would like to meet Dave as well. Because Dave, your story is amazing. You are an entrepreneur that you created 7 businesses, right? That generated altogether over $1 billion, B with a billion with a B, and helping 1,000 customers. And you're doing it while working from, should we say, a forest area in the Pacific Northwest. We just discovered before this podcast that we are both in the Pacific Northwest. I'm more in the city part, and you're in the rural part. You're in Washington, I'm in Oregon, but it's amazing. So you have quite a story. At the age of 29, the doctor told you that, you have to change your lifestyle or you're going to have a heart attack, right? Or something like in that area. So I'm super interested. I'm sure our listeners as well. Like, what happened and how did you manage to actually have 7 businesses?
Yeah. So at the age of 25, I started my first grown-up business, as I like to say. I had a number of businesses when I was a kid that I started, and it was a digital advertising agency. I was able to hustle my way by networking to a 7-figure agency pretty quickly. So 4 years in, I had a 7-figure agency, and I went to the doc because my wife was like, hey, you're about to turn 30. I'm pregnant with our second kid. Maybe you should go get checked out. And they did a variety of tests, and one of them was a stress test. And I came back a week later, and the doc was like, hey, I didn't know if you're going to have a heart attack. And I was like, I don't get it, doc. And he goes, you don't know, you just have one. He said, you're the most stressed out person we've ever tested. We've tested 4,500 people. If you don't stop what you're doing, you're going to have to, you're not going to see 40. And so I was like, okay. And so that led me to a lot.
I used to announce to your wife, right? Come home and say, hey, guess what?
I am the winner. I am the best at something. It was a thing. And I had to make some personal changes in my habits and lifestyle, but I also had to make some business changes as well. And, one of the first things that I knew that I needed to do was really get systems and processes put in place so that I didn't have to do what I was doing. And some of those systems and processes were internal, and some of them were marketing, and some of them were sales, and they went across the board. And as I did that, we were able to grow the agency without me killing myself, which is a positive. And I eventually sold that agency in 2019 and then started Avadel, which is our one-to-one marketing agency that books meetings with people's dream clients directly on their calendars. And it's like a very high touch, it's not SDR, it's very, very, very narrow. Like, we're trying to reach this one person for you. And so it's really fun. Then we purchased 3 other businesses and started 3 more. So a total of 7 different companies at this point. And it's pretty fun to be able to run them remotely.
That's amazing. So is your staff all remote, or do you actually, some of those businesses have an actual location?
So 6 of them are remote. The one that's not is a flight school, because you kind of have to be in person to learn how to fly the planes. So that one has a physical office, has a physical location, but the other 6 are all fully remote.
So how did the flight school come about?
Yeah, that's a good question. So my brother and I had always wanted to go into business together, and nothing had ever really kind of made sense. And then he said to me last year, he flies for American Airlines, and last year he was saying like, hey, it's a little bit slow. Maybe we could start a flight school together. So we bought a couple planes, threw up a shingle, and launched that in March of 22. Yeah, March of last year. So, and in its first 12 months of existence, it did around $500,000 in revenue. So not too bad.
Absolutely. All right. So let's go back to that point. You were 29, almost 30. The doctor said, okay, Dave, if you don't change your ways, if you don't decrease the stress, you're not going to see 40. Okay. So that was what I would call a wake-up call, right?
Just a little bit. Yeah. Yeah.
So then you decided, okay, I am going to do what?
Yeah. So the first thing I did was I was kind of stunned, and I took 3 days to just kind of figure some things out. I had lots of ideas, but I kind of came up with a few different things. So first one was my personal health. One of the things that I realized was that there were days that I would drink coffee till late in the afternoon, sometimes more than a pot a day. And then I would switch to drinking beer or alcohol, and I would drink to come down from the caffeine that I've been drinking all day so that I could go to sleep. And I would use the caffeine to get me up so that I could function and, do a lot of things. And then I would use the alcohol as a way to creatively think. And I would always take it too far in the evening. And so I was like, one of the things that I want to do first is I need to drink a glass of water a day, because there would be full days where I wouldn't have a single glass of water. So I just made it a goal to have 1 glass of water a day. And then I also had realized that, I'd been an athlete in high school and college, all growing up too. And so, but I had stopped working out. I had a young family where I'm trying to make the business work, and I was not taking care of myself in any meaningful way. And so I was like, drink a glass of water, go for a 5-minute walk. If I drink more than 1 glass, that's bonus. If I go for more than a 5-minute walk, that's bonus. So most days I would go for a 30-minute walk. I'd drink 4 or 5 glasses of water, but there were days where I'd be like, oh no, it's 10 o'clock. I've been working all day. I need to go I'm exhausted. I need to go get my 5 minutes in. I need to chug my water, right? So that was on the personal side, the first thing that I did. Now, here's what's funny. At this point in my life, my self-care routine is so robust that it's completely changed. But this was 7 years ago, So like I've had lots of time. So now I do polar plunges and infrared saunas, and I lift, and I go for walks, and I take naps. Who knew you could take a nap? And I drink lots of water, drinking some right now, and I eat really healthy. And so there are things that took time for me to start to change, but I changed them. In the business, the first thing that we were in the process of implementing EOS. Are you familiar with that?
Absolutely,
Adi?
yes.
So we were in the process of implementing it, but I really prioritized getting it done. And so for the listeners that aren't familiar with EOS, it's the entrepreneurial operating system. It's how I run all 7 of my companies. And it's more than what I'm going to describe. And the way that I'm going to describe it will at least give you a picture into the window of what it did for us. It has a regular meeting cadence where you meet with your leadership team, or if you have a small firm, it may be everyone. And you sit down and you go, okay, what are the issues that we need to discuss and solve? You have kind of a rhythm and cadence of that meeting. There are other things that you do there, but that's essentially the idea. And then the other things I did was give us ways to hire, promote, and fire people that made sense, do quarterly reviews, all sorts of things that were really, really helpful. So as we implemented EOS and really got it going, we saw an immediate change in the things that were happening in the agency. We also started to make it a point to have standard operating procedures. We hadn't done that. We hadn't documented.
Part of the pie.
Absolutely. And we had not documented the most vital things that we do in our business and how to do them. And so we started to document. We started to systematize our lead generations. So instead of me going to networking events, and that was the whole thing, it was like, how can we make this so this is really fun and easy for us to keep having new business conversations? So we did two things with that. One, we started sending out cold emails and cold LinkedIn messages. That was easy. The second thing was we started to do what I call one-to-one marketing, which is I wanted to work with large corporations that would pay us a lot of money, but I didn't want to network my way to them. That would take some time. So what I did instead was I figured out, hey, what if I just go interact with this person online? So I go interact with their LinkedIn, their Twitter, their Facebook, and we'd send them thoughtful gifts. So one of my favorite stories to tell about this is there was a company that was quite large in our area, and I really wanted to work with them. So I kept interacting with this person's, it was a CMO. I kept interacting with this woman's Facebook page and her Twitter and her LinkedIn. And eventually what I figured out was she posted this photo of a cooler. It was like set out in, I saw the cooler in the background is how I should say it. It was sat by the pool where she was hanging out. And I could tell that it was her cooler and whatever. And it was just like one of those igloo coolers. And so I bought her a Yeti cooler. Like this was, again, think like 8-9 years ago. This is a big deal. Or I guess 7 years ago. This is a big deal. They were like $400. And I put a note on top and I put a padlock on it so you couldn't open it and mailed it to her. So it said inside the note, hey, I love what you do. I've been interacting with your social media. It looks like you could use a nice cooler upgrade. If you have lunch with me, I'll bring a key for the lock. And so she loved it. She thought that was so clever, so funny. We had lunch, ended up signing a $600,000 a year deal with them, had a great time working with that brand, all because we did something that was thoughtful and meaningful. And so anyways, those were some of the things we started to change. We hired some salespeople. We elevated some of our staff as we started to see increase in revenue. And so, yeah, those were some of the big things that we did to change what we had going on.
I love it. I think it's great. So you basically changed the process of you running around town or wherever you were, just networking in person into being more intentional and actually either cold outreach, right, via emails or LinkedIn messages. But at the same time, you also targeted the people that you wanted to meet with and interacted with them on social media by being very thoughtful, creative, I would say, imaginative. I mean, some people will call it bribe, but I think it's genius because it makes you laugh, right? It's something different. It makes you stand out somehow, right?
Yeah. And I think that it's one of those things where what do you really, like if someone was going to approach you, Adi, how would you want them to approach you? Would you want to get a cold email? Maybe. Like that may work because sometimes I'm just looking for a solution and I'm not actively shopping, but we're talking about it with my leadership team and the cold email works. However,
you know what? A cold email does work. I responded to it, to several, if they're written correctly, if they're really written in a way that they have some kind of a message that is addressed to me and it gives, it's respectful and it shows that they understand who I am and understand my problem, right?
That's it. And that's the deal too with when you do these one-to-one campaigns too, that's how you also feel. You feel seen, you feel heard, you feel understood. One of the things we did for a client recently was there was a company that they really want to work with that was based in Vancouver, British Columbia. And we had been following someone on our staff and engaging with her social media. And she mentioned on Instagram that her 7 or 8-year-old son was having a birthday party and that they were excited for his birthday, right? And so we had been having conversations with her and we said, hey, does he have a link to like an Amazon wish list or something? And she said, oh, no, you don't need to get him anything. And we were like, we know, but we'd love to. So then we clicked on the link. We went and bought him like $120 worth of stuff or whatever. And we sent it to their house and they were floored. She couldn't believe it. And she was like, okay, who's your client? Who do you want to talk? Who do I need to talk to? You guys are too cool. And so there are ways to just make people experience the feeling of being seen, heard, and loved.
I love it. Good. So you basically started, okay, I'm not going to go all over the place. I'm going to be much more focused in my lead generation. What about your sales? I mean, you as a business owner, I'm sure a lot of entrepreneurs are listening to us right now. They go, okay, well, how can I turn my sales to somebody else? I mean, I'm the rainmaker, right? It all depends on me. How did you handle that?
Yeah, it took some time. I mean, that one was probably the last thing that I gave up. But what I did was I knew that if we were going to grow, I needed to hire sales staff. So what I decided was I need to figure out how to close these cold leads really effectively, really efficiently. So I set a number for myself that until I was closing the cold leads at 30%, I couldn't hire someone else. Now that was for me, that's not for everybody. But I wanted to have a 30% close rate before I could go hire someone else. Because my thought process there was, if I can do 30%, then I can train someone else to be 80% of who I am. So that means that they're going to close around 24%, which is great. If they're closing a quarter of all conversations we have, we're going to be in great shape.
Absolutely.
So I brought someone on. Yeah. So I brought someone on. They did okay. I eventually let them go, brought another person on. It took me three tries to really find the right person. But then once I got the right person, all of a sudden my time completely freed up. And they were closing a lot of deals. In fact, at one point they got better than me. They were closing 35% of deals at some point before I sold. And so it takes time, but you can find people that will do a really good job.
Absolutely. And I think it's a good lesson to learn is that sometimes you have to go through several hires in order to actually find the right that really works for you. And now don't be afraid of that. I just had an interview with Sadie from Bar 3. She's the founder of Bar 3. And she's amazing. And she really emphasized, Sadie Lincoln, that, one of her successful things is that she was not afraid of taking risks. I mean, not taking stupid risks, but not afraid to spend money and not afraid to take risks to actually be able to grow her brand. And that was a great lesson to learn. I'm going to include that episode as well in the show notes, because I think listening to people like you and Sadie and people that have made it really by finding out what is successful, it's really helpful to other entrepreneurs to learn from. Because, we're not going to hire right at first time. Maybe sometimes, yes, you luck out. I'm not saying you don't, right? But you can't be afraid and stop trying because it didn't work, right? You just have to go, okay, well, it didn't work. One didn't work. Let's analyze it. Let's see how we can do it better and then find the next person, right? So sales was the last thing. I mean, lead generation, changing the lead gen and how you do business and how you generate business. That was the first thing. What came after that, between that and actually letting go of the sales process? So
I wanted to make sure that we had a steady flow of leads, right? So interesting stat from HubSpot that they do every year. They survey 100,000 B2B marketers, B2B sellers, and B2B buyers. And when they do that, they have those conversations, they do those surveys, they've found that if you want to hit your sales goals, you need to be booking 150 meetings per month. Like that's the number that you're going to have a 93% chance to hit your sales goals. If you have under 50 calls in a month, you have a 7% chance of hitting your sales goals for the year. And so one of the things that I really had to figure out was how many meetings can we take and what does that look like? So I waited until we were averaging 100 meetings a month. And so just imagine
100 sales meetings.
100 sales meetings every month, and I was the only person that was taking them.
Wow. How did you do that? Some of them don't show up. Some of them, it's like your calendar was basically, so that means like 25 meetings a week. So that means 5 sales meetings a week.
5 sales meetings a day on average. I mean, there were days that I would literally sit, and this was years before Zoom was popular, so I had to walk people through how to do Google Meet and stuff like that. But I'd sit in a virtual call all day. I mean, there were days where I really did have 16 meetings back to back to back. No time in between. because we would have months where we would have more than 100. So the most meetings that I ever took in a single month by myself was 162.
How much would you
give the
out of
audience?
the 162, just out of curiosity?
So our sales cycle at the time on average was about 6 weeks, unless it was a really large deal. But out of the 162, we closed 38% of those.
Okay.
So
you had to add staff to continue. Yeah.
Yeah. So what we would do is we would DQ about 60% of the clients that came to us, we disqualified, or the prospects, right? So imagine if you have 100 meetings, only 40 of them were good, that we could actually help. Some people have unrealistic expectations. Some people don't have a budget, whatever, right? So out of that, about 40 of them would be good. And then I'd close 38% of those. So just to kind of give a perspective of that.
Yeah. And you felt like you needed to have those meetings on your calendar in order to qualify them. You could not pass it to somebody else, or you were not able to qualify them with a questionnaire or anything like that?
That was my thought at the time. I've changed my mind on that. But yes, my thought at the time was I have to keep doing this. And obviously it changes the ball game when you have someone that can take those calls, and we call it triaging now. Triage the call, take it 15 minutes, do discovery. If it makes sense, then they pass them on to a sales leader that's got more experience. But that's kind of how we develop new sales staff now, is we have them come in and their job is to triage. Why? It gets them really good into thinking how to talk to a potential client. How do they interact? What are the questions that we need to be asking so we know if they're a good fit or not? And so it ends up being a really helpful position to have in place.
Absolutely. And I think also what you just mentioned in terms of you tried it yourself, you wanted to make sure you had enough leads. So then
right,
you can actually hire a salesperson and grow from there. So I think that is also an important lesson in how to scale the business. So once you figured out that lead generation machine, what was the next step that you did in order to actually get yourself out of the business?
Yeah, so I went through the process of really honing in on client results at that point, because that was like the next step. Once you get the cash flow going, you have a good enough service that you're offering, but how can you take it to another level so that you can actually start to stack on more clients? And that's really the thing that most people miss in that spot, is that they get really good at client acquisition, but they aren't doing other things so great. So that's really kind of like what we got into, was going, okay, now how can we really increase this to another level and get where we need to go? And so really focusing on the product at that point, so that when we signed new clients, it was stacking them on top of each other instead of having some leak out the bottom as we were adding.
Right. So you basically make sure that all the results are there, and probably also developing what you are delivering and how you're delivering. So there will be like more of a streamlining in that area, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Right. And then it's easier to find salespeople that can replace you, because you can explain to them what is it that you are delivering, and it's not just in your head, and it's not promises that you have to make on the spot, right?
Correct.
Good. So in terms of processes and procedures, so what would you say in terms of like, how did having well-documented processes and procedures help you in scaling the business?
It's everything. It's everything. One of my favorite things to say, or I used to say this to employees, I don't have a whole lot of interactions with employees anymore, but one of the things that I used to say to employees a lot when they would come to me with a question after we had SOPs and procedures in place, they'd say, "Hey, Dave, I don't know how to do such and such." And I go, "Okay, cool. Have you looked at the SOP?" And they go, "No." And they knew, I trained them at that point. It's like, hey, if you don't know how to do something, don't come ask me. We also made it a point that for that business and for most of our businesses, they are slow Thanksgiving to the new year, right? So it's not that we're not doing work for clients, but a whole lot of clients aren't coming in. A whole lot of clients aren't leaving. So we would just bring them in and say, hey, we're going to go through our SOPs and make sure it's like spring cleaning in wintertime, right? Let's make sure that these are up to date and that they're filled out correctly. And so as we did that, we would always update our SOPs every year, and it made it really, really effective as a way for us to make sure that those were on point. But the thing that the SOPs didn't just save me time, they saved my manager's time. They also made sure that we got better results. So if we had a client that was struggling, one of my favorite things to ask was, well, are you following the SOPs? Because we were a digital ad agency, I did something called I called it creating a playbook, right? So a lot of times you're making strategic decisions when an ad campaign isn't functioning at its optimal level, which can seem like a bit of artwork and magic and alchemy if you don't know what you're looking at. And so I could never find a person for a long time that could really do that well outside of myself. And what I started to do was just go, hey, listen, if you're running a brand awareness campaign, here are plays A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and they're all different solutions to their problem. And sometimes I would say, hey, listen, if you run play A and it doesn't work, then next run either play C or E. So now they're not having to come to me to ask a solution to a client problem. They're making educated decisions based off the information that I've already created for them. So what this eventually did was it allowed me to just work in the business about 20 hours a week. And that was a game changer. Once I had sales and marketing, and then we're working on product, now what else do I do? I really can leave if I need to leave. If I wanted to take a 2-week vacation, which I did, I can leave, and I came back and the business had grown. And that's a tremendous feeling to have, to see the business grow even when you're not there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great. That is such a success. And it's amazing to hear your story. So tell us a little bit about your life now. Like, where do you live? Describe your environment, which I think was amazing when you described it to me.
Yeah. So I live about a mile away from a national forest. The backyard is my river, and then there's BLM land across the river, so it's not being developed. It's just completely wild out here. It takes us 25 minutes to get into any semblance of civilization. And we are a solid hour away from any sort of decent metroplex. And so, you know, when I walk outside, I am in a forest, and there are cherry trees and apple trees that my wife and kiddos have planted, and bald eagles fly up and down the river every day, and river otters play in the river below us. About 50 feet off my back deck, salmon spawn multiple times a year, and so we get to watch them. I even throw on a wetsuit in the wintertime, put on some goggles, and go watch them as they do their spawning dance on the riverbed. And it's just this place where there's a waterfall that comes from a spring that's on the hill just in the front of our yard. So if you stand in certain spots in the yard, you can hear the river rushing in one direction and the waterfall following from the hillside in another direction. So I did that with intention. You know, my wife and I just decided after the pandemic that, you know, we wanted to be in nature more, because we were living in a city before that. And this just became the spot. And so we absolutely love it. And there's lots of good science out there, by the way, that talks about if you want to reduce your cortisol levels, if you stare at a living plant for 3 minutes, it reduces your cortisol levels. If you look at natural occurring water, lake, pond, spring, river, stream, doesn't matter. If you're looking at that, it will reduce your cortisol levels as well. So, you know, business is business. There are always things that are interesting and challenging about running a business, even when you have systems and processes put in place. There's always things that are going on. And so being out here allows me to be calm, relax, de-stress, and really enjoy all the environment that's around me.
That's beautiful. Oh, Dave, what a great story, and well done to you for creating this. So if people have questions about it, they want to know more about your company, they want to reach out to you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so they can shoot me an email, david@avadel.agency, and we can chat about getting some meetings booked with some of their dream clients directly onto their calendar. And you can also follow me on social media. I'm pretty active on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. So you can follow me at RealDval, RealDval. And I post content, and a lot of times on TikTok in particular, you will see a lot of my yard. So
I'd love to see that. Okay. Totally do that. Well, Dave, thanks again for being such a great guest on this podcast and for all the information and for inspiring other entrepreneurs that it's possible. It is possible to have the dream life and still be super successful.
Thank you so much for having me, Adi. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.